From 2011 to 2014, Sean Shaynak looked like your average, overachieving science teacher at Brooklyn Tech High School. But behind the classroom doors, Sean was grooming his students, building up trust, giving special attention, and eventually trading perfect grades for sexual favors. And it's not just Sean. I've got 4 more insane cases of students and even teachers who were caught doing wild shenanigans when they thought no one was watching. Sean Shaynak. You see, Sean was the kind of teacher parents hoped their kids would get. Smart, charismatic. He grew up in Brooklyn himself, born in the late 60s, raised in a typical family, crushed it academically, and worked his way into education like a golden boy on a mission. But behind that polished image was a predator with a plan. Between 2011 and 2014, Shaynak started targeting vulnerable students, specifically teenage girls who looked up to him for guidance. He wasn't sloppy about it either. He picked them carefully, zooming in on their insecurities, the ones who felt unseen. Then, he'd flip the switch. Out came the compliments, the extra attention, the one-on-one study help. And before long, those girls felt special, like they had someone in their corner. But the more they trusted him, the deeper his control got. And for the ones who crossed a line with him by engaging in sexual conduct, he gave them straight A's. Perfect grades, not for hard work, but for playing into his twisted manipulation. It all unraveled in 2014 when he made one huge mistake. He sent an explicit photo of himself to a student on Snapchat. She took a screenshot. He panicked and sent 2 angry selfies right after, as if that would undo anything. The girl told her friends, then her parents, and within weeks, Shaynak was in handcuffs.
He's a father of 1, is accused of using the school's aerospace club to groom students and sexually abuse them.
Authorities raided his home and found thousands of text messages, photos, and videos, a digital trail of manipulation that stretched across years and allegedly tied him to other crimes. It turned out Shaynak took his time to groom his victims and purposefully didn't have sex with girls under 17 to avoid statutory rape charges. But that didn't make it any less predatory. He was hit with 36 charges, including unlawful imprisonment and sending indecent material to a minor. His bond was $750,000, and if convicted, he was staring down the barrel of 25 years behind bars. Some of the girls he manipulated were brave enough to sue, hoping to get some kind of justice for the trauma he caused. Others were too scared, too hurt to relive it in court, and who could blame them? Still, the truth had already started to spill, and in the end, Shaynak folded. He pled guilty, sparing his victims the pain of a full trial and locking himself into a future he couldn't grade his way out of. Justice finally caught up with him. Shaynak got 5 years in prison and was permanently banned from teaching. He's now a registered sex offender. Stephen Dale Griffin. Stephen was the kind of science instructor that students at Memorial High School in Southeast Texas considered engaging. To colleagues and parents, he seemed like a professional, the kind of educator who lit up the classroom. But behind that affable exterior was a man hiding a disturbing secret. It was during the 2022 to 2023 school year, while Stephen was navigating a divorce, that his behavior took a dark and unacceptable turn. One of his students, 18 years old at the time and enrolled in his science class, became the target of his manipulation. What began as a trusted teacher-student relationship quickly morphed into something predatory. The relationship reportedly turned sexual over Thanksgiving break in 2022. Their first encounter took place in a hotel, a deliberate, calculated decision by Stephen to isolate and exploit. And it didn't stop there. What followed were multiple sexual encounters, including acts committed inside his classroom, a space meant to foster learning and safety. That sacred boundary between educator and student had been obliterated. But perhaps most shocking of all, the victim revealed that she and Stephen also had sex in the back seat of her car, parked outside a restaurant, in public, while the world passed by. It wasn't just immoral, it was bold, shameless, and dangerous. Stephen wasn't simply crossing lines. He was redrawing them to suit his desires. He blurred the student-teacher boundary further by showering the victim with gifts, including his staff jacket, a symbol of authority twisted into a token of manipulation. He gave her test answers, padded her grades, and awarded her perfect scores on every assignment. These weren't acts of affection. They were tools of control, used to silence her, to keep her loyal, to maintain power. But like most secrets, this one couldn't stay buried forever. In October 2023, Stephen abruptly cut off contact with the victim, texting her and demanding that she leave him alone, citing his efforts to reconcile with his wife. That's when the victim's mother found out, and once she did, everything began to unravel. On November 30th, 2023, the mother disclosed the allegations to Memorial High School principal Lisa Weir. She acted swiftly, arranging a meeting between the victim and a Spring Branch ISD police officer. Stephen was arrested soon after, a move that sent shockwaves through the school and the larger community. The investigation took a pivotal turn when authorities obtained access to the victim's phone. What they found was a digital minefield. Countless incriminating messages exchanged between Stephen and the student, preserved across text messages and Snapchat. The victim didn't hold back. She provided a detailed statement recounting the explicit nature of her encounters with Stephen and submitting screenshots to further corroborate her claims. The Spring Branch ISD presented this overwhelming evidence to the district attorney's office. Recognizing the severity of the case, the DA moved forward with charges. And yet, despite the gravity of the allegations, Stephen's bond was set at just $5,000, a figure many in the community found shockingly low, especially considering the extensive evidence and the breach of trust involved. Court records show Stephen is free on the $5,000 bond, under the conditions that he shouldn't have contact with a student or any minor under the age of 17, and that he wears an electronic ankle monitor. As at the time of this upload, the legal proceedings continue, but the fallout is already clear. The trust between students and educators, a cornerstone of any school, was fractured. Stephen's actions didn't just impact one student. They shook the very foundation of a community that believed schools were safe. Catalin Glover, June 6, 2022. A former Las Vegas student walks into the Metropolitan Police Department and drops a bombshell. She had been in a sexual relationship with her teacher, Catalin Glover, that lasted 4 years and started when she was just a teen.
Caitlin Glover is facing charges of being a school employee engaging in sex with a student. Right now, she is out on bail.
It began in December 2017. Catalin first approached the student as a mentor, offering guidance and emotional support. But soon, that mentorship turned into something far darker. The student told police they began messaging on Snapchat, and the connection deepened. By 2018, they were speaking on the phone daily, conversations that reportedly included discussions of Caitlin's past relationships and sexual experiences. Then things escalated. In May 2018, Caitlin allegedly began picking the student up in her car and driving her to a quiet area near the student's old house. There, according to the report, the two would engage in sexual activity every 2 weeks. This continued for years, all in secret. According to police, Caitlin allegedly threatened to kill herself if the student ever ended the relationship or told anyone. That emotional blackmail kept the victim silent until 2022, when she heard a disturbing rumor Caitlin might be involved with another student. That was the breaking point. Phone records backed the story. Investigators found evidence of long calls between the two from November 2018 to July 2020, and 430 calls from Caitlin's phone to the victims between August 2020 and January 2022. What began as mentorship ended up being a long-term case of manipulation, grooming, and abuse, one that only came to light when the victim feared Caitlin was doing it all over again. When confronted by investigators, Caitlin denied all allegations of sexual misconduct. According to the police report, she admitted to having a close relationship with the student, but insisted it was never romantic or sexual. Instead, she portrayed herself as a mentor and even a mother figure, claiming she was simply trying to help a struggling teen. Caitlin told officers that she had driven the student home several times and messaged her frequently on Snapchat, but maintained that the communication was meant to provide emotional support. She acknowledged that the student had stopped talking to her at some point and admitted she had sent texts saying she loved and missed her, but insisted it was out of concern and care, not romantic intent. She also claimed that she had invested time, emotional energy, and even money into helping the student succeed, and felt heartbroken when the student cut off contact. In an effort to support her claims, Caitlin's attorney, Joel Mann, handed over 2 handwritten letters allegedly written by the victim. One of them, said to be a Mother's Day letter, described Caitlin as better than her biological mother. The second letter went even further, calling Caitlin a hero who had changed her life. But the timing of the accusation cast a long shadow over Caitlin's defense. The victim told police she only came forward after hearing that Caitlin might be involved with another student. In August 2022, police spoke with that second student. She denied any relationship with Caitlin and told officers she had deleted all her messages back in January, leaving investigators without a paper trail, but not without suspicion. Caitlin is currently out on bail, and the alleged victim graduated in 2021. Brianne Altus. When the relationships first began in the quiet town of Farmington, Utah, No one could have imagined the storm that was about to hit. A scandal of unimaginable proportions unfolded, one that would shake the community to its very core.
A former Davis High School teacher accused of having sex with 3 different teenage boys is going back to jail now.
At the heart of this was Brianne Altice, a former high school English teacher who, by all appearances, had her life in order. Charismatic, professional, and deeply involved in her school, she was the kind of teacher parents trusted and students admired. But for years, Brianne had a hidden agenda, one that would forever alter the lives of the teenagers who once looked up to her. What began as seemingly harmless mentoring and extra time spent with students after class would soon blur into manipulation, exploitation, and betrayal, acts that would tear families apart and leave lasting scars. She allowed the boys to linger after class. She'd offer them snacks, laughs, and a sympathetic ear. Day by day, the relationships grew more personal. Brianne encouraged them to confide in her, slowly isolating them from authority figures and peers. And then came the daily flirtations, compliments disguised as encouragement, glances that lingered too long, messages that turned from academic to emotional. Little did the boys know that she was taking advantage of their admiration for her. The boys were just 16 and 17, and as the relationships progressed, Brianne did the unthinkable. She engaged in sexual relationships with the boys. The boys, still in high school and craving validation, were pulled into relationships they were too young to fully understand. They thought they were in control. They weren't. Brianne was, and as the abuse deepened, so did the secrecy. But the truth has a way of surfacing. The shocking truth of Brianne's actions came to light when one brave student had the courage to report his relationship with her. And in December 2013, Brianne was arrested, and the full extent of her crimes began to unravel as 2 more victims came forward and shared their own stories of abuse at the hands of their teacher. Remorsefully, Brianne pleaded guilty 2 years later, and to stop the abuse from happening, the judge sentenced Brianne to at least 2 and up to 30 years in prison. Despite her apparent remorse, the damage had already been done. For the victims, healing was a long and complex road. Trust had been broken, innocence had been stolen. And while Brianne walked free in 2019 under parole, the trauma she left behind remained imprisoned in the minds of her former students. During her parole hearing, Brianne claimed she had changed, that she was no longer the same woman who had crossed unforgivable lines.
I have found self-love and self-compassion again. All of this has come within these walls that can be very dark and very debilitating at times. And you really have to have some good boundaries to make it in here.
In the years since, the case of Brianne has become a haunting symbol of how power can be abused behind even the most polished facades. Because sometimes, the danger isn't a stranger in the dark. Sometimes, it's the trusted teacher at the front of the classroom. Stephanie Peterson.
A Florida teacher stands accused of having sex with an 8th grade student. He was just 14 years old.
Stephanie Peterson, a 26-year-old former middle school teacher, found herself at the center of a scandal that began in 2017. Stephanie, investigators say, started an illicit relationship with a 14-year-old 8th grader. What began as inappropriate attention soon spiraled into something far more disturbing. On multiple occasions, she would pick the teen up from his home late at night, around 11 p.m., and return him hours later. These secret rendezvous became the backbone of their forbidden affair. But the secrecy masked a darker truth. As the relationship escalated, Stephanie's actions took a sinister turn. According to the teen, she began supplying him with marijuana, drawing him deeper into a world of blurred boundaries and psychological manipulation. Soon, the consequences crept into every corner of the boy's life. His grades dropped, his behavior changed, and while the outside world remained unaware, he was caught in a silent spiral, trapped by the fear, the secrecy, and the power imbalance. Stephanie made it clear no one could ever know. If their secret got out, she warned, they would both be in serious trouble. The manipulation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The shocking truth finally came to light when the teen told his parents. Terrified and heartbroken by their son's revelation, they warned Stephanie to stop at first, but she refused, so they immediately contacted authorities.
When the boy told his parents about it anyway, they confronted Peterson and demanded she break it off. She allegedly refused, so his parents reported her to police.
In that moment, a chain reaction began, one that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. The Volusia County Sheriff's Office acted swiftly. Within hours, Stephanie was placed under arrest. The charges were serious: 2 counts of lewd or lascivious battery, and 1 count of transmitting harmful materials to a minor. She was booked into the county jail. Her bond was set at $25,000. Her fate and her freedom now hung in the balance. The community was outraged. Parents demanded justice. Students felt betrayed, and colleagues were left reeling. Then came another twist. Stephanie had quietly resigned from New Smyrna Beach Middle School just days before her arrest. The timing raised serious questions. What did she know? And how long had this been going on? As investigators dug deeper, the image of a troubled teacher gave way to something far more chilling: a manipulative predator, deliberate in her actions and careful in her concealment. Prosecutors argued this was no moment of weakness. They said Stephanie used drugs and alcohol to lower the teen's defenses, and that those choices were conscious, not accidental. The defense, however, offered a starkly different version. They pointed to Stephanie's bipolar disorder, claiming it drove her hypersexual behavior and impaired her judgment. She wasn't evil, they argued. She was unwell, but the prosecution hit back hard. Stephanie knew what she was doing. She knew it was wrong, and she did it anyway. The courtroom became a battleground. On one side, a narrative of mental illness. On the other, the cold truth of an adult exploiting a child. And then, the verdict. In a decision that stunned the room, the judge sentenced Peterson to 36 months in prison. After that, 2 years of house arrest. She would also serve 5 years of sex offender probation and be required to register as a sex offender for life. It was far less than the 6 to 10 years prosecutors had recommended. Stephanie's sentence may have been lighter than some expected, but for her victim, the consequences were lifelong. In the aftermath of the trial, advocates for student safety pushed for stronger screening and oversight of educators across the state. Parents demanded reform. Schools revisited their policies. The case became a flashpoint in the larger conversation about teacher misconduct and the vulnerabilities of children in institutions meant to protect them. As for Stephanie, her release from prison would not mark freedom in the truest sense. Branded as a registered sex offender, her future would remain forever shadowed by her actions. But for the boy she manipulated, he didn't get to simply walk away. He had to rebuild, piece by painful piece. Because while headlines fade, trauma doesn't. Be sure to subscribe and click on this next card on your screen.